This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week, two stupendous human beings, Nick White.
Hey.
And Kate Lamphere.
Hi.
Thank you both for joining me this week. Before we start the show, I want to remind folks that we made some changes to our Patreon tiers, specifically to the $1, $2, and $5 tiers. So if you haven't checked that out yet, make sure you head over to our Patreon to see what kind of changes we made for those tiers. They're not huge, but if you're into the new Paul and Mike read Doom Patrol, or if you're into the book versus book series, there's some changes about how you'll get that content depending on the tier that you're in. So make sure you head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Now, let's actually get into the show. So let me ask the question that I ask every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kate.
I've been great. I finally finished a home improvement project that I've been working on for 8 million years or so.
Woo! Home improvement. So, Xander, make sure you put that Tim Allen good. No, it's inside the episode, please.
So now I can actually focus on getting through all of these library books I checked out 2 months ago and reading some more comics that I have lying around. So I finally read Beasts of Burden, Animal Rights by Evan Dorkin and Jill Thompson. And this had been staring at me from my library's shelf every time I went in to pick up a hold since I moved and had a new library location with a new selection. So I finally picked it up, and it's been sitting around. And this book is about animal characters. It's kind of like Scooby-Doo if all of the characters were Scoobs. There's some supernatural stuff going on in their suburban neighborhood, and they have to investigate all of these things. There's this really interesting kind of wizard group called the Wise Dogs, and so if anything really goes wrong, they have to get a group of 3 dogs and howl at midnight, and eventually one of these wise dogs shows up. And I just really liked that they had this Gandalf club that they could call on. I was kind of annoyed by their names. Like, the stray cat's name is Orphan, and one of the dogs that is half white is just named Whitey, and then there's a pug called Pugs. And so that was kind of unoriginal for me. But apart from that, I really enjoyed this book, and I actually thought that there was only 1 volume of this. So once I finished it and it ended on a little bit of a cliffhanger, I was pretty disappointed until I looked it up and realized that there are 2 more volumes. So I imagine that I will be reading more of this.
That's awesome. I've only heard really good things about Beasts of Burden, and the art is unfucking believably good. Holy cow.
Yep, I agree. It's all watercolor.
Yeah, I mean, Jill Thompson is just stupendous. I mean, I think everyone should know that. If you don't know about Jill Thompson, come on, get on our level. No, I'm kidding. Jill Thompson is just a fantastic artist. You should check out all of her stuff. But yeah, that sounds great. I'm glad to hear that that's good, because it's been on my forever to read list. I just have never made the time for it, so maybe I should change that. But what about you, Nick? How have you been? How have comic books been? All that stuff.
Well, I am really freaking tired. I just got back from spending yesterday afternoon and evening, and then this morning visiting my sister and my brother-in-law in the middle of the state, somewhere roughly thereabouts of Lansing, and seeing their new place, and just, doing Father's Day and all that stuff, and then being like, oh, we gotta leave real early, I gotta do the show. And they're like,
thanks,
okay,
Nick.
That's fine, no one cares. Although, my brother-in-law, I think he did say he listens every once in a while, so here's your opportunity, Neil. Now that you've been mentioned in the show, just go ahead and ring me up and tell me you've been listening, because I know you're not, you liar. Nick White, bringing families together on a regular basis. So anyway, now that I've got coffee piping through my veins, I have had some time to get some reading done. I did just start X-Men Grand Design on the way home, and that's by Ed Piskor. And I guess there's a lot of questions, and probably I want to avoid most of those because I don't want to fall down the X-Men rabbit hole. But the big one I have for you, Mike, is
okay,
is is Ed Piskor attempting to try to like reinterpret and condense all of X-Men history in a way that makes a more cohesive, streamlined story with some actual narrative readjustments or realignments on his end, or is he really leaving everything untouched? Do you know?
So from my understanding, Ed Piskor, and if you finish this issue, like, are you on just issue 1 or are you reading the trade?
I'm reading the trade.
Okay. So I don't know if they did this in the trade, because I bought both of the trades, but I never read them because I read the single issues. In the back of the single issues, every single page that he made a reference to something in X-Men history has a credit.
So there's like footnotes, works cited.
So there's like 20, like I honestly 12 pages of footnotes in some cases where he's like, this is what happened between 1963 and 1971 or whatever, you know.
And I've done it in one panel, yeah.
Yeah, and so so to answer your question, I think he's trying to condense things to make it clear without leaving anything out that's important to the overall continuity. Obviously, there are some things that are going to get skipped over, some villains that are probably forgettable and unnecessary, or some characters that showed up for an issue and didn't really have any major impact, But I think on the whole, from what I understand he's doing, he's trying to create a basic build-up that leads you to the modern era of X-Men, and everything after a certain year or something like that is considered full canon, and like it all makes sense. But he is condensing a lot of it. He's doing exactly what he did with his Hip Hop Family Tree series, or is doing with his Hip Hop Family Tree series, where he takes history and gets it into a digestible, very dense format that you can read. But I think on the whole, like, he's not leaving anything out. So yes, there's probably some questions, and I think going in as an X-Men reader, I had a little bit more of an advantage than maybe someone who doesn't know any history about the X-Men.
A little bit, right? Yeah, I mean,
yeah, a little bit.
That's of the week. Congratulations.
Yeah, but I think on the whole, I think he's doing a good job. I don't think he's leaving anything out. Like, it's very important to read all the back notes. Like, you should read every single page of that book.
I mean, Michael, you don't need to defend this book to me. I don't know enough to say that you're wrong on any of these things.
Sure. I guess what I'm getting at is that if you want the full experience, you should read every single piece of that series, like everything that you can get your hands on.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to juxtapose the phrase "full experience" and X-Men like at any point in my life. Like, that's not
Sure.
No thank you.
Sure.
But I only say that because, and again, this is coming from someone whose biggest like X-Men background is like the 4-player arcade game, basically, which means that like Dazzler has a much more like prominent role in my life than it probably does in most X-Men fans.
Sure.
But like, for example, he has Captain America and Logan fighting together during World War II and coming upon Magneto as a kid before he gets captured by the Nazis. Does this happen?
So, depending on the story that you read, or depending on the flashbacks that you adhere to, yes.
Okay.
Here's the thing. So
I was just wondering, because I had never heard that. Never heard that before.
In the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe, I think during the Logan series that they did, there was all this story about Logan's past, like Wolverine's past, right? And
he was
born
in the
in like
Civil
the
War, and he was in World War II, blah, blah, blah. Yeah,
exactly. And so he was in all these things, though the character didn't show up until like the late 70s or mid 70s. Like,
right.
They did a bunch of retconning later, and I think, again, Piskor is trying to just flatten out all the continuity and say, this is, if you need a definitive source of what the answer is, this is the book that contains
He's
it.
trying to fold everything into place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So you're getting
fair.
a chronological story is what the most important part of it is, so that X-Men fans and Marvel fans can go, well, in this book in 1961, Wolverine said that he was doing this, but in 1994 it said that he was doing that. It's like, no, now we have the actual definitive thing, because it's a classic big two move. Let's just flatten out the continuity so that we can build moving forward. So yeah, I guess that's the long answer for that.
I'm so glad I'm not in that fan club. Thank you. Yeah, the other book that I want to mention briefly is Oblivion Song, Volume 1. This is written by Robert Kirkman, with pencils by Lorenzo De Felici and colors by Annalisa Leone. With Kirkman, like, obviously I go into a lot of his stuff with skepticism. Obviously he's got a lot of critics. Oh, everything Kirkman does, it's just done for the screen. It's just done for adaptation. Okay. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's a detraction, whatever. I guess if you wanted to make a criticism of Kirkman, maybe it's the fact that like anyone who signs up to work with Kirkman is now basically like stuck with him for the next 15 years of their life. Which, I mean, as if you're a freelance comic book person, someone saying, "Hey, how do you want to spend the next 15 years making money?" I'm sure that's a real a real sacrifice for them.
Exactly.
But he has an eye for really picking out sort of underused or underutilized talent and really bringing it to the forefront. I think a lot of Paul, oh my gosh, and I even had the phonetics of his name written down a few weeks ago, so I got it right then. I'm going to botch it now. Paul Azteca?
I think it's Azteca.
Yeah, the artist of Outcast. Like, I mainly knew him for doing a little BPRD before that, but all of a sudden here he shows up and boom, he's a star, right? So
yeah.
I feel like he's found somebody new that I think this pairing is really, really good. Although, like I said, the funny part is, even though he's discovered them, like, maybe they'll be truly quote unquote free in like 7 or 8 years, who knows? But in terms of the pitch of this book, and it's kind of hard to elevator pitch it because it's almost like a detective story as you attempt to like piece together all of these little morsels, but telling someone that is not really the most effective elevator pitch. So once you piece some of those into place, you basically come up with this concept of, what if out of nowhere 30 square miles of Philadelphia were transposed with 30 square miles of an alternate dimension? So,
I mean, you got me. I think that's a really cool concept.
So basically, our buildings, the people, our technology, they all vanish in an instant, and in their place, all of this bizarre vegetation and weird organisms that are equal part gloopy and deadly take their place. And if this is the point where you say, well, I'm glad to hear nothing changed with Philly, that's rude. How rude, sir. And how dare you? Home of Donovan McNabb, or at least it was at one point, and the Philly cheesesteak. So again, rude. So this event is basically known as the Transference. And 10 years later, Earth is mostly recovered. They've fought off the beasts that showed up, and they've boarded off the 30 square miles of the United States from the public. They've even found a way to visit this other dimension and try to hunt down and find and recover their lost citizens. That being said, 10 years later, they're finding less people. This recovery project is not as successful. It's slowly getting shut down, and its funding is going away. And this main rescuer named Nathan Cole, he's still searching. He's searching for the one person he hasn't yet found. I won't really get into that, but people can probably make about 3 to 4 educated guesses and probably figure it out. But there are some deeper, darker reasons behind why Nathan's searching has been very fruitless. And there are also some interesting motivations behind why he's actually searching beyond finding this person in the first place. I'm hooked. I'm interested. I've really enjoyed it so far. I would encourage people to give it a try.
Sounds a little bit like the movie Annihilation.
Yeah, I could see that a little bit.
That's the one that, like, people, it's got Natalie Portman and everyone said they were never going to sleep again, right?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, I haven't seen it, but that's what I've heard.
Thing.
It's like a bear, right? Something with a bear? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that movie.
Yeah.
Nick, I know we've talked a lot so far, but I'm just curious, what made you pick this book up out of all the other Kirkman books or all the other books out there? It seems like this is pretty mainstream for you, man.
You know what? I'm a fucking casual. What can I say? Give me all the Walking Dead omnibuses you can find. I'm ready.
No, and no shame. Honestly, no shame in reading Robert Kirkman's book. To me, this really surprised me when you said that you had picked it up.
Yeah. No, I mean, first off, it was on sale, which is like, you can be garbage comic issue 313, and if you're in a Humble Bundle, I'm like, well, you never know. This could be something.
Yeah.
It's crossed. No, like I said, Kirkman is someone that there's no guarantee I'm going to get past volume 1, but I'm definitely going to give it a shot. And I think I literally just looked it up today, and this already got optioned by Universal Pictures, and I think they're going to try to make it into a movie. Although I feel like almost every project Kirkman does now is like automatically greenlit.
Yeah.
Whether it has the reason to be or not. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed Outcast. I sort of fell off the wagon, but I thought that was good. Tried Invincible, just didn't fall down the rabbit hole on that one. And Walking Dead, I just never started, so that was kind of my way of dealing with that. But I'm enjoying this. I think the pencils might be a little bit loose for some people, but I like that. I think for probably the first time in a while, probably Invincible, the book has a slightly lighter. Some of the subject matter is a bit darker, but it feels lighter, and the tone and the artist that he's paired with have a lighter tone than like fucking Outcast, for starters.
Sure.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if this has your seal of approval, I want to try it, because I definitely was hesitant, because I feel like I got on board with Outcast and I fell off the wagon because I lost interest. So maybe I'll give this volume 1 a shot. Who knows? But yeah, anyways, for me, because we got to get through more stuff here, I'm just going to jump into. I had a very fun X-23 reading session for myself. So Kate and I should say Kate Scotchless and I sat down and recorded an X-23 minisode that's coming out in July when we do our break this summer. And so I sat down and I read X-23 number 12. This is by Mariko Tamaki, Diego Olortugi. I'm butchering that name. I'm sorry.
Oh, you got
and
a fun
Walden
one
Wong.
there, yeah.
Yeah. So this was like the last issue of Mariko Tamaki's run on this series, and I thought it was a pretty good goodbye of sorts. I'm guessing she'll continue to show up in comics. Like X-23 is not going away, but it felt like a nice goodbye for the character in like X-23 and Gabby, aka Honey Badger. I don't know what's going to happen in House of X and Powers of X, but I loved the last arc of this book. I thought it was really nice the way that Tamaki kind of signed off the writing for, instead of having X-23 sit down and talk with Gabby, instead she's writing her letters like her mom did to her when she was a child and everything was awful for her. Laura, aka X-23, that is. So I think the thing about this series was that it is 12 issues. I don't know if it got canceled or if it came to a natural conclusion. I'm gonna guess the latter, because Marvel's been doing a lot of these 12-issue runs, and I've been really, really, really enjoying it. I think Tamaki, she had a really hard time following Tom Taylor's all-new Wolverine, because how do you follow the death of X-23? How do you follow old woman Logan, I guess? Is that old woman Laura, I guess? And so I enjoyed what she did, but I don't think it was the best X-23 run. But I was happy to see how it concluded. It was pretty nice. But otherwise, I also read X-23, the Complete Collection Volume 1, which is the quote-unquote origin of X-23, aka Laura Kinney. This has got a bunch of creators on it. Jay Farber, Craig Kyle, Marjorie Liu, Simon Spurrier, Chris Yost, art by Nuno Alves, Felipe Andrade, Mike Choi, Will Conrad, Dave LaFuente, Francis Portela, Sana Takeda, and Billy Tan, because this book is like 500 pages long and it covers multiple miniseries. I don't want to get too deep into it because you really should go listen to the minisode that we have in a couple of weeks. But all in all, I forgot how harsh of a fucking origin story Laura Kinney has. There's a lot of unnecessary, edgy shit that involves like unnecessary violence against women and rape, and it's like, holy shit, guys, you could have, like, Laura Kinney, she was a clone of Wolverine and she was trained to be an assassin as a child. You don't really need to make it worse, and yet they did. I will say the end of that volume starts Marjorie Liu's run on X-23, where she basically teams up with Gambit on a motorcycle and travels across the country, and I fucking love that run. Not just because it's Gambit, because it's like, who's the worst uncle you could think of, and why would they ever think they could help someone that's like damaged and needs help? And it's Gambit and X-23. So it's a really fun thing. So make sure you listen to the minisode. It's going to be fantastic. Kate and I like gushed about how much we love that character, and I got really ranty and excited about there's a specific period of time of X-Men that's absolutely my favorite, and I went way deep into it. So you can look forward to that in July. But anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about comics that are coming out this upcoming week. Comics are dropping on June 19, 2019. Let's talk about what you're into this week. Kate, let's start with you.
I am really excited for Rat Queens number 16.
That's what I picked.
That's not allowed. One of you has to seed their ground on this. It's just
no, it's totally fine.
Restart the episode, guys.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's Mike? What do you mean it's not totally fine? Like,
Kate, go ahead.
This is the start of the next arc, and they have a new artist named Priscilla Petriades, I think. She seems pretty new to the comic book industry. She only has a few things that she's done that's on the market right now, but she did do a special issue called Swamp Romp for Rat Queens in April, and I didn't even realize that this came out, so I just looked at the previews online a little bit, and her art seems pretty good. It really speaks to the characters as I know them. There's been a couple of special issues here and there where I really didn't like the art at all, so I was kind of nervous to see that there was a new artist, but I'm glad that they have a new artist considering that they have had all sorts of issues with this book, and she looks pretty good, a pretty good match for this series. However, the characters' eyes all were kind of like red and buggy, and they looked kind of stoned, so art-wise, that's a little makes me a little bit nervous. But then again, the characters might just be stoned because it's this book.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that issue 16 was where the series kind of met all of its drama in the first numbering of this book.
Oh yeah,
a couple of years back. I don't even think that the original number 16 was collected, so that's only available as a single issue. Which I didn't even realize until I fell down this rabbit hole of why is there a number 16? I didn't even realize that this whole series had been renumbered because I've been reading it in trades. So anyway, I'm crossing my fingers that number 16 is not a cursed issue number for this series.
Yeah. Well, I can say, I'm going to break the entire structure of this show, and I'm going to go next and talk about this series. I know, Nick, I'm sorry.
You're setting a bad precedent. You let two people pick the same book, and now you're just going to go.
We've done this before. This before. Very quickly, I will say my thoughts on Rat Queens number 16. Ryan Ferrier is taking over for this book. If you've been reading the back issue, so I've been reading this week or monthly as it's been coming out, because I don't care what anyone says. I like this book. I know that there's a lot of drama and shit around it, but I think on the whole, it's a positive book. Ryan Ferrier has taken over the writing duties, and apparently he's been with Curtis Wiebe since the beginning of the series, and he's kind of been there as like a person to bounce ideas off of, not like an editor, but just someone that's been working with it. He was lettering the book, so he's very familiar with the characters and how they should be. And Curtis Wiebe said that he felt very comfortable handing over the reins to Ryan to write this book. So I'm confident that we're going to keep the same tone and the same amount of fun that the series has had since the beginning. Outside of that weird issue 16, that is, yeah. Kate, you're right. It's not collected for a reason because it breaks all the continuity, like, completely. And it felt like a really weird issue to begin with when you read it. So we won't even go into it. But that was my 2 cents on it. I just kidding, Nick. I'm going to go after you because I'll talk about another book that I'm excited about. So what? Go ahead, Kate.
I just wanted to say really quick that I didn't realize that there was an issue in the series that I had missed at all, and it is available on Comixology for like $2. So because of my devotion to the series over the long haul, even considering all the drama, I might have to pick it up and read it and just consider it fan fiction or something.
I mean, that's a good way to think about that. Nick, what about you? What are you excited for this week?
Well, for me, it's a new number 1. Which, wow, Nick stepping outside of his comfort zone. It's a Valiant book, so there you go. 1 step forward and 6 steps back. So this is PSI-Lords number 1. It's written by Fred Van Lente, and the art is by Renato Guedes. do you guys remember that show like Mad Money? I think it's still going on. Like, I know it's like memed a lot, where the guy just like shouts buy and sell about companies or whatever on MSNBC.
Oh, yeah. It was an Arrested Development a couple times.
I guess I forgot. That's right. I forgot about that. Well, anyway, if we were to go with like Mad Money verbiage, like Valiant was veering into sell territory with some of their creative and staffing decisions that followed the DMG acquisition. A year later, and at a point where arguably all of the Simmons / Shamdasani, they were basically the guys in charge. A year later, now that most of their projects have played out, and we're beginning to see the direction of the new management, like, I wouldn't say that we've shifted to buy, quote unquote, but I would say that we're like firmly at don't sell now, which I guess is a good thing. Valiant brought back Fred Van Lente, who wrote one of their 4 launch flagship books, Archer and Armstrong. He also wrote Ivar Time Walker, one of my personal, very underrated favorites, as well as Generation Zero, which is a Harbinger book, so it can go fuck itself. And so having Van Lente back is a real solid vote of confidence, at least for me, that like Valiant hasn't said like, hey, if you ever worked for Valiant in the past, or you had like a big presence as a one of these initial people from the Shamdasani era, like, we're not going to have you back because like we don't want people we don't want people thinking back to that era and being like, oh, I yearn for that. So I'm glad that they brought him back. I'm really glad they got Renato Guedes involved. He's been a real rising star for Valiant in the past year or two. His work on Shadow Man with Andy Diggle was amazing. His work on Harbinger Wars 2 and Bloodshot Salvation was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's a painterly style that tends to be a little static, but it's a darker, kind of muddier, blurrier tone in some ways than the weird kind of photorealism shit you get from Alex Ross. So, it's a welcome difference. In terms of just the synopsis of this book, the synopsis from previews is that 4 astronauts awake in an otherworldly prison with no memory of how they got there. What is their connection to the PSI-Lords, and how will they escape? The PSI-Lords are a piece of Valiant that they brought back. This is not a new original thing. Much like a lot of the other Valiant material, they've gone back and sort of revived things or reimagined things. The original PSI-Lords first appeared in Rye in the Future Force, and they had a cameo in Magnus. But they're mainly known for having just a short 10-issue run that ran from 94 to 95, and it was part of Valiant's 41st Century setting that they put a lot of their books in. Basically, in the same way that Rye was sort of the Bloodshot of the future, the PSI-Lords were the analog to the Hardcore, which, as we all know, were the people who were able to tap into individual PSYOP powers at a time to fight the Harbinger Institute, as is well known by everyone. It's just a established fact.
That concept is really cool, but I don't know how many people know about that, because I remember reading some of Harbinger and I was like, whoa, what the hell? Like, and it was a very cool idea. I really enjoyed that as a reader.
Oh, the Hardcore?
Yeah, the Hardcore stuff is very fun. And plus that name is just
for
fucking
those uninitiated,
ridiculous.
The 10-second summary of that is like the Hardcore has the ability to dial up this person called the Operator, and the Operator basically flips a switch that allows them to tap into a certain PSYOP power, but they can only use one power at a time. So like maybe they're using flight, but then someone blasts at them with a laser, and then they have to dial up shield, but at the same time they're dialing up shield, they've now lost flight, so now they're shielded, but they're falling to their death. So you can see how that created a lot of interesting kind of fun a lot of fun comic book potential. So
definitely. Well, that sounds like fun. I mean, Valiant books always want to hook me in. I don't know what it is. So, but plus the idea of 4 astronauts awake in otherworldly prison. Like, come on, astronauts lost in space is the most fun kind of story in sci-fi, right?
It really seems like it's the only thing they know how to do. So,
yeah. Well, really quick, I'll pick another book just so that I'm not copying Kate and Nick's brain doesn't explode.
Bring some fucking order to this anarchy that you've established.
I will say the other book that I was looking at that I'm excited for is Excellence #2. This is Brandon Thomas with Emilio Lopez and Kerry Randolph. Holy shit, issue 1 was awesome. I'm excited for issue #2 because I love the idea of fantasy people having to work in the shadows and have to save the world, but there's this really fun idea of how people of color work for people who have privilege and power in the world, and I'm really excited to see how Brandon Thomas tackles that in this series. So looking forward to that very much so.
I think I heard somewhere that like the first issue has already gone back for like a third printing or something like that.
Oh yeah, I think it did really well, and I really hope this book continues for a long time. I think the concepts introduced in this series just in the first issue are really, really cool. And man, I do love rebels. I love this whole book is about like rebelling against like a system. Plus there's magic. Plus there's like a whole like positions of power thing about like people who don't know how good they've got it. It's so cool. It's got a lot of really fun concepts to play with. So I'm excited to see how Brandon Thomas like tackles the rest of this book, because there's a lot of really fun seeds that he planted just in the first issue.
It appeals to that punk side of Mike Rappin, which, as we all know, is a big part of Mike Rappin.
Listen, we don't want to even get into it. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk
take
about
a break.
Gimmicks and
Mike's
comics.
going to list off the entire Sum 41 discography to me, so it's going to be
oh yeah, true punk.
the only true punk pop.
Yeah. For our show this week, we are talking about gimmicks in the comic reading experience, and this is a very, very broad topic. We may have to do a second episode all about packaging, because that's a whole thing. But what I wanted to talk about today was the idea of what are some weird things we get with the comic reading experience. Like, everyone understands, if you're listening to the show, you probably understand that when you pick up a comic, you kind of just read it left to right, or if you're reading manga, right to left, and that's it. It's pages on a screen, or pages in your hand, or a trade, or a hardcover, or whatever. But over the years, over the many, many years of comics, there have been some very wacky, weird, gimmicky things that may or may not affect your comic reading experience, and we have a massive amount of notes. So if you're interested in some of them, I'm going to put some of them in show notes. Some of them are going to go in the Patreon tier for show notes. It's a whole thing. We've got so many things. But I guess to start, one of the things that kind of brought me into this idea for the topic was, at one point Marvel did this thing, and I don't think they do it anymore, where you could download an app, and then as you were reading a comic, you could scan with your phone, your smartphone, and it would bring up this little video or something about the page you were looking at, or about the panel you were looking at. And there was this little AR logo that was right on the fucking page, like right in the middle of someone's beautiful art. Not in the middle, but in the bottom corner, there would be this AR symbol, and you could scan it and it would bring up a little video. I remember trying it and just being like, I think this is cool. I would watch this on YouTube, but I do not want this to interrupt my comic reading experience, just to like hear some creator or some artist or some editor just being like, yeah, so when we were designing this page, we were like, wouldn't it be cool if Captain America was giving the finger? And then everyone laughs, and that's the end of the video. It's like, okay, not a lot of value added there. Maybe for some people did, and if you really enjoyed the Marvel AR stuff, I'd love to hear why. But for me, I wasn't a huge fan of it. So I was thinking about this. I was like, where are all these other options? Like, what are the other things that all the creators or all the publishers out there have been doing to try to add to the reading experience of comics? And little did I know, Nick was going to go deep into the underground lore of comic books and find a million bazillion options. So I'm curious, what kind of stuff did you guys pick up? I'm looking at our notes, and we've got a ton of stuff, and I don't want to keep talking. So Nick or Kate, do one of you want to start with some of the things you uncovered in your research for this episode?
I kind of want to talk about Barrier real quick, because it's the only book of this list that I've actually seen and like been a reader for as it was coming out, and They combined 2 gimmicks for the reading experience and 1 gimmick for marketing, so it was just a whole mess of ideas.
This is the series by Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin, right?
Yes, yep. It came out, I think it was from Image last year, and I was told...
I think it was originally Comic Book Day issue.
It was originally distributed online on their website, Panel Syndicate, and then they eventually got it published through Image, I think, right?
Interesting.
I should say, I'm pretty sure that's how it went, and I think there was a joke in an issue somewhere where Brian K. Vaughan said the only way I would ever publish these books physically is if I could write a digital Walking Dead book, which he did. But anyway, sorry, not to completely derail your conversation here.
But yeah, Nick, the first issue was a free comic book day comic, I believe.
I got it from there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there was 5 issues in the full mini, and I was told at the comic shop that they weren't going to reprint it. And from what I've been able to find online, that's true. It's not even available as a trade. But this was. It was laid out horizontally, so when you open it, the crease, your page crease, your gutter, is going to be in the middle, at the top, and then you open it. So, and then it was half in Spanish, like there was an English character, or English-speaking character, and a Spanish-speaking character, and they get abducted by aliens. Spoilers. So, like, I took a little bit of Spanish, but I wasn't very good at it. So I finally downloaded Google Translate onto my phone, and then I downloaded the Spanish dictionary so that it'd be faster. And I literally read these issues with Google Translate open on my phone, which was fascinating technologically, like that I can do that in today's, like, technology sphere of things, of possibilities, but it was like a real big, like, reading.
Was it
took
reading
a really
barrier?
Long time. Yeah.
Was it a reading barrier, Kate? Is that what it was?
It was indeed a barrier. Yes.
Oh God.
Thanks, guys. This has been the I Read Comic Books podcast. We'll catch you next week.
That's Mike's tight 5 right there. So
yeah, thank you.
That's the full extent of it.
And then on top of all of this, it was also oversized. Like it was too tall for a normal bag and board. Which now that I know that it was online, I could see how maybe they made it in like more traditional like newspaper size panels, and then that's why they had to print it at this size and then horizontally. That makes more sense. But there was just a whole lot going on with this book.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, they did a similar book, Private Eye.
Private Eye. Yeah, I think Brian K. Vaughan, who I'm going to guess from this is a real punk. Like, I think his main rule for Panel Syndicate is that we're going to make books that will never fit on your bookshelf because, again, he's a punk. Like, well, if you've ever gone into any shop that sells trades, it will not be hard to find Private Eye because it juts out like 9 inches from the shelf.
So what's interesting is I think the idea with Panel Syndicate was that they were going to do everything in a landscape format. They weren't going to do anything that was portrait, so that it would you could read it on a computer, you could read it on a phone, and you wouldn't have to like scale it too much. And which I think is an interesting idea. It was a good experiment. I enjoyed Private Eye for what it was, and it sounds like, Kate, I guess overall, did you enjoy the book? Did you feel like that language issue was, or the language scanning thing was a problem? Like you couldn't enjoy the book otherwise?
Well, I haven't finished it, but I own all of the issues, so that should tell you how badly I want to sit down and struggle through that again to finish it.
Yeah.
I mean, in total, I would say that it's a pretty good story. Like, I want to know what happens, but man, like, the little bit of Spanish that I know does not get me through a discussion about alien abductions. So, and then I don't even know if Google Translate knows the word for abduction. There was a few things that couldn't translate.
That would be surprising. But yeah, okay. So, I mean, that's a pretty interesting gimmick. I don't know if it's a gimmick so much as them trying to be honest about Spanish, right? Like that's them saying, this character speaks Spanish, and there's no reason that you would need it translated unless you spoke Spanish, you know?
Yeah, for inclusion reasons, I liked that they did that. It's just with everything else that they did for this book, it was a big hassle to read.
Gotcha.
I have to like sit in a different position to open it a different way, and I can't like curl up with a blanket because it takes so much more space to open it up. Anyway,
Brian K. Vaughan planned it all that way. Like that was.
Nick, I don't stop it. We're not making any more claims about Brian K. Vaughan today.
Kidding. All right, fine.
I'm kidding. But yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even consider that book, but that's an interesting idea. Like, as a barrier to entry for reading that book. But I guess if you spoke Spanish, that would probably be like a nice change of pace, all things considered, right? Otherwise, what other stuff did you guys have? I had some more stuff about Marvel because all the gimmick stuff that I know of is just old Marvel stuff from the last like 10 or so years. What about you, Nick? What are some of the highlights of your notes that you've got here?
one thing I would want to say, or kind of preface this whole discussion in a way, would be that, like, I don't necessarily consider gimmick to be a pejorative term.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that anyone else on this show feels that way either, but at least when I was doing my research and everything like that, like, you know, gimmick is just another way to try to make money, basically, right? So, like, some of it is obviously more tawdry or unscrupulous than others. Some of it just seems kind of interesting, right? Like, so I think what I'm getting at is there's like a broad spectrum of, like, gimmicks in terms of how shitty or how shady they are, or just how kind of maybe they're just fun, right? One thing I found that was kind of interesting was that in a CBR article about the greatest comic book gimmick covers, they mentioned that actually a lot of gimmicks owe themselves to the success of the direct market in the late 80s, which, I mean, for some of us probably seems like a no-brainer, but it's still interesting to know. And that's because the direct market eliminated returns. This lowered the printing costs of a lot of comics. This freed up all of that money to be spent on production. And it's true that for some production studios, some of them, this allowed them to take their black and white book and actually start dabbling in actually coloring their pages or having a higher improved print quality. But it also meant that they could experiment with special covers because they would only be printing as many as were ordered, and they wouldn't have to deal with any cost-prohibitive returns.
Right.
Which is really what brought about this. One of the craziest covers I've heard about is for an issue called Jab number 3. Now, Jab was an independent comic book anthology series that was going on in 1993, and they decided they were going to do something really out there for their third issue. And by out there, I mean that they decided that each issue was going to have a bullet hole in it, a real bullet hole in it.
Like someone's going to actually shoot the cover of every single issue?
Right, exactly. This isn't like, oh, this is roughly the shape of a bullet hole, let's put this into our printing press and just implement it and just basically hole punch all of the issues. No, all of the issues were actually shot. The standard edition was shot with a 22, but there were 9mm, 45, and shotgun special editions. The shotgun edition came in a bag and was guaranteed to be unreadable. Not unlike a lot of the other 90s polybag books. So,
are you telling me, wait, they shot not just the cover, but the whole issue itself?
Yeah, exactly.
Holy, what?
Yep.
I'm sorry, that's fucking insane.
So the hole went through the middle of the book, and all of the artists were asked to incorporate this into their stories. It took 3 days to shoot all 3,000 copies. And the cover of which was a despondent fan surrounded by long boxes and Mylar bags who was distraught that his book was no longer in mint condition because of the hole in the middle of it. So it's kind of a weird one, leaning very hard into the gimmicky nature of the 90s while at the same time basically saying, aren't these gimmicky, I need to put this in a Mylar bag, I need to store this in a long box, it needs to be in mint condition, aren't these people idiots? So it was a very interesting both critiquing and participating in the fad. So
oh my good, I mean, I just googled the cover for this book and
yeah,
oh lord that's all I can say about it.
So, I mean, I guess the best synopsis of it is America, basically.
Yes, I like that. I like that.
So that one, that one's kind of fun, not really sinister, I would say. Like, the ones I have more problems with, and we'll get to those, are the ones that really created a speculator's market or something like that.
Sure.
Like another really fun one that I enjoyed before we get into the really, deep, dark, depressing stuff, was Superman Man of Steel number 30. This came out in late 1993, and this took place not long after Superman decided he wasn't dead anymore, which was kind of a weird decision on his part because, like, when he was gone, it was like, time, let's make a lot of money, as DC, effectively split Superman into 4 different books. Mm-hmm. So Superman decides he's not dead, and Lobo decides he's going to pay a visit to Earth. for reasons that he wanted to see if Superman was as strong as he was before he died.
Right. Sounds like a legit reason to come to Earth.
That seems legit. It's a pretty clear pitch for a story, so I guess that works. So the cover was a very glossy wraparound of Metropolis, and included in the polybag were vinyl drawings of Superman and Lobo, which would stick to this cover due to static electricity, and this came to be known as the first DIY cover. So
interesting.
I think these issues were also known as colorform issues, which I at first misread as chloroform issues, at which point I was like, this is a gimmick. This is weird. So
did you say that
yes.
the vinyl thing was the same thing as the color form?
I believe so. I think they're called color forms as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought that the color form covers were something different, because something that I read online said that they came with these like sticker type things where you could like place the characters in different spots.
Right, and that's what those vinyl...
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, maybe we aren't talking about the same thing, but...
Yeah, the one I was looking at said that it was Man of Steel number 30 and Worlds Collide number 1, like way back in the 60s.
Oh, wow, yeah. I think I'm seeing Worlds Collide number 1 came out in 1994, maybe?
Oh, okay. Anyway,
but even still, I can see the stickers on this thing that I'm looking at, and they look like the stickers on a fucking comic book cover.
Yeah. The whole sticker thing was like that. Like spoke to the child in me. Like, oh, a sticker book, but it's Superman.
Right. And you could place them and then remove them and place them again, right?
Yeah. As far as I know.
I mean, that's a fun little gimmick. I'm all for that. That seems like a lot of fun. Your cover is never going to be the same as anyone else's. How about that? So you get that CGC graded.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm sure that a lot of people could just, once they were done with their cover, they could submit that to DC, and DC could basically make that the plot of the next Superman issue.
Right.
Everything preceding, during, following the death of Superman, like, not only was that a time where there was just so much Superman content being put out there, but it was also, gimmick central in terms of the time era. So it was sort of a epic meeting of the two. So yeah, there was definitely a lot of that stuff going on.
Yeah. Okay. So there was also a Superman glow in the dark cover where I guess Superman got blue powers.
Sure. Right. Yep.
So the blue would glow in the dark. And there was a couple of other ones back in the 90s for the glow-in-the-dark gimmick, because there was a Sandman special called In Dreams I Walk With You. The artist was Dave McKean, and it shows an alternative image on the
cover? Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And then there was a couple of issues of The Spectre by John Osterlander and Tom Mandrake, where it revealed skeletons.
Cool.
Yeah, I want more glow-in-the-dark stuff.
Scary. Give me some spooky, scary covers that will freak me out when I put them on my wall in the middle of the night and I just see a skeleton glowing. Yeah. That'd be great. Yeah, really, thank you so much, DC, for ruining my fucking brain. Oh, man. See, the other stuff that I was thinking about was, like, Marvel did these adaptive comics at one point where you could read their books in the Marvel Unlimited app, and they had, like, for instance, they did they had hired this guy, David Arileon. He's like an Emmy-nominated composer, and he wrote original music for the Captain America Winter Soldier comic. And so as you're reading through like a handful of issues of that run, like this music starts to play and swell with the beats of the story, supposedly. I mean, I don't know how that works with reading, because
I was going to say, like, I must assume that in order for them to make that work, the thing must completely control your reading pace of the issues.
Or it was, I mean, I've heard of Marvel doing something similar to this. I remember at C2E2 years ago, they debuted something like this where you could sit down and you could read through a couple of pages of a book, and the music was written and crossfaded in such a way that as you move forward, it would swell and it would do all the things that the music needed to do, provided you weren't reading it too fast. And so, like, there were just little clips of music that all went together. But I don't know. I never tried it. It didn't sound like a fun thing to me. I realize I'm coming at this with a lot of negativity towards the gimmicks, because, like, when I'm reading comics, I don't need you to like insert another type of media to it. But I do think
when I'm
like
reading
these
comics,
covers...
I adhere to the Sonic mantra: "Gotta go fast." So
yeah. Okay,
all
right.
You're not getting in my way.
There's a lot of playlists anymore for comics. As you're reading through them, there'll be like a recommended track to go listen to on Spotify.
Yeah. And I think that was something I was also considering putting in my notes, and I didn't. Like the end of some issues of, what was it, Hawkeye, I think? David Aja would be like, oh, here's the songs I was listening to while I was creating this series, or creating this issue.
Yeah.
And a couple of other series have done that, like The Weatherman. Most recently, I've been reading that. And at the end of those issues, they were like, hey, don't forget to check out our Spotify playlist where we, had all of the music that inspired the issue or inspired the whole series.
Yeah.
Which I think it's a cool idea, but I'm not going to be listening to, Phoenix or whatever, some random band while I'm reading the comics. I just want to read my books, yo.
I could see listening to those soundtracks later, like after I've read the comics, but then there are comics where like every couple of spreads they have like a recommended track for that set of pages, and I can't see looking up these tracks and then changing the track halfway through to the next track. Like that just seems really disruptive.
Yeah. So, long story short, don't introduce any music to your comics, folks. Come on.
Honestly,
don't
try to get me to do anything else when I'm reading comics. I'm reading comics.
Right. I mean, I'd be curious to know if some folks do that and they enjoy listening to the music that have been suggested by artists or creators, I should say, when they're reading the books, because I personally don't enjoy it. But if you do get something out, I'd love to hear like what your experience is with that and why you enjoy it. So, reach out to us. But, yeah, I guess those are the big ones that I had. What else do you guys? You guys have a ton of other really fun stuff. So, jump into something, please.
I wanted to talk about die cuts because I love die cuts. They are fantastic, fascinating, packaging ideas. I mean, this is back to packaging a little bit, the way that things are put together physically.
But for those who aren't aware, what is a die cut?
So I took a tour of a printer one time, and they showed me this machine where they have to specially make whatever shape it is that you want to cut out of your cover, and they have to load into the machine, and one by one, they cut these covers, and you cut that die, that shape, out of that cover. So it might be more automated now or at a larger printer, but just the amount of work that goes into these things, it's costs extra. It takes extra planning because it's going to show you what's on the next page through the hole in the cover. So anyway, I think that they're fascinating. But this has happened once in comics that I could see for Batman number 13, Death of the Family, back in 2012. And they used it in a really intriguing way. So from the pictures I could see online, they were introducing the Joker's new look, like they were hinting at what it might be, so you could see the Joker's face through Batman's mask, or it would be the bottom half of Harley Quinn's face or something like that. But die cuts are also really hard to photograph because if you take a picture of it, it looks like it's just a flat piece of art. So I had a really hard time finding pictures of this.
Okay, so I actually have a copy of this.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I remember this when this came out. I was like, oh, that's really cool with the Gimmick. So I picked it up because I was like, that's really cool. I want to have it. So yeah. I think I have that somewhere in my boxes of comics, just that one-off issue.
I'm really surprised that there aren't more of these. I mean, like I said, was it overpriced? Did it cost more?
No, I think it cost the same price as a regular comic.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, again, this was 7 years ago, so maybe my memory is wrong.
Yeah, well, it does take extra work and extra time at the printer probably, but I would love to see more of these because, I mean, I guess if you're not going to bag your issues, it is a tearing possibility. Like maybe they had some difficulty shipping it or something like that. That could be a possibility.
Oh, sure.
But it is a really cool thing to do as long as you can store your books safely to use this for something like a mystery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty cool cover. I mean, I like that big, the card stock that they use for it is pretty heavy, which makes the book feel firmer. But yeah, good. I could totally see one of the ears or something getting hooked and something and getting torn.
Right.
I think I specifically stacked it between two books when I put it in my bag to go home that day from the shop. So yeah, that's really. I guess I'm surprised that more shops haven't done that because it seems, or sorry, not shops, but more publishers haven't done that because it seems like a really fun gimmick to add to your book to do something really iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the flip side, the optics, of course, don't look good because it makes you look like you're making the slow procession towards the 90s again, right? Which,
yeah,
like,
I can see that.
I have mixed feelings about that. Like, I have no problem with some of these concepts being introduced as long as the speculator market that accompanies them isn't really part and parcel of it. You know, in the same way that, like, DC with DC Rebirth, they made it, and I'm not sure if this is still true, because I'm obviously mostly out of DC at this point, but with DC Rebirth, virtually every single issue had a main cover and a variant cover, and like it wasn't like the variant was ordered in a different quantity, it wasn't like the variant was harder to get, there wasn't like a speculator market really brought on board with it, it was just a different option, you know what I mean? So like I have no problem with a lot of these things if they're done in that fashion.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, we could get into a whole discussion that I don't want to get into in like the leaning back towards the 90s of the crazy amount of variants that we've seen. I mean, pretty sure that Fantastic Four #1 had like 100 variants or something.
Oh, no.
I don't know. That's an exaggeration, but it was quite a lot. But
there's actually been a variant interiors for the Teen Titans series. I couldn't find a year on this, and I couldn't find any pictures online. But
when you say variant interior, explain this, Kate. Hold on, what?
It's basically like variant covers, where depending on which issue you buy, the interior is different. So there was the very first issue of this series, I guess, was released where there were different backstories for each of the characters depending on which issue you bought. So, like, there were fans that were trying to find all of the different issues for all of these different backstories, but they were all just marketed under Teen Titans #1.
That would drive me insane.
It would also drive me insane. But, like, I think it would be fine if on the cover it said Teen Titans #1 and then it had the name of the person under it. So
right.
You could at least figure out what you were buying before you bought it. And then maybe that would make it easier to find, like, the rest of the issues. Mm-hmm. Or if they were all collected in a trade later or something. But, yeah, this seems like it could be really frustrating if it wasn't labeled on the cover.
And it's just semantics bullshit anyway, because it's just another way of saying, here's 5 one-shots you have to buy, right?
Sure.
Like, these aren't tie-ins, these are variant interiors. Okay, looks like you're up for a promotion. Jesus.
Oh, man.
One of the gimmicks that I actually encountered myself, that I lived through, that I think some people might remember, was Zero Month for DC.
Oh, yeah.
And this is when DC decided to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the New 52. And this took place in September of 2012. And they decided that this celebration was going to be a line-wide one without any exemptions or considerations for how that might look. So all of the books would get a 0 issue, which with the obvious intent that these 0 issues would be providing origin stories. The thing is, they didn't really think this through, because certain books, for example, Phantom Stranger, ended up launching that month. So because it launched the same month as 0 Month, the first issue wasn't exactly issue 1 like it was for most books. Now the first issue for this book is actually issue 0. Which, I guess is just kind of weird and only contributes to how confusing comic books can be.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side of that, they also didn't consider that they would end up canceling certain books in that month. So other books like Resurrection Man and Voodoo and Captain Atom, they were all canceled in September, which means that those books now had to do double duty, because not only were they closing the doors to the book and the writers and teams had to find a way to conclude these books, but because it was 0 Month, they were now also having to play the game that DC had set up. So more or less they were having to provide a closure as well as an origin story at the same time these books. And it's like, hey, Nick, how did that go? Well, just go ahead and guess, because it sounds like it went real bad. It's like, at least for that month, right? Like, don't introduce any new books. Don't cancel any books.
Right.
So that you don't have this weird situation. And you might be thinking, well, Nick, that sounds like a terrible idea. Did DC learn from this? No. In the 2 subsequent years, they decided that they loved this New 52 anniversary idea. So in 2013, we got Villains Month, and in 2014, we got Future's End Month, or as I like to call it, DC shows how much they love lenticular covers and the problems and production perils that come with them. Nick, you're ragging on DC a bunch. Look, these are just the things I experienced because I was reading DC at the time, so...
The lenticular covers, they're like the 3D things where you can like shift them left and right and they show 2 images, right?
Bingo. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I recall this. I think I have a couple of them. I think Scott Snyder might have signed one of mine. I might I might own a bunch of those. They also did a Lego month, right? Didn't they also do something like that where all the covers were like Lego characters?
Yeah. I don't think that was technically part of the anniversary thing. I think that was more when DC started having, and I'm sure you probably remember this, I don't know if you got into this at all, Kate, like DC started having themed months. So like one month was like Harley Quinn month. So like they found a way to do variant covers for all of the books where Harley Quinn found her way into space with the Green Lanterns and all of this. And there was like a Batman month. There was like a Flash month.
Yeah.
I mean, they were goofy and crazy, like I said, because they ended up with like all sorts of weird, where they had to like put Batman in space with the Green Lanterns or whatever for Batman month or whatever, it's But again, like they were largely harmless gimmicks, right? Like these covers didn't enter into a sort of speculator mess, So.
Yeah, at least not to my knowledge.
Not to my knowledge. Yeah, that's fair.
Well, before we get into probably the greatest gimmick in all of comics, because that's what I want to end on, Nick, I do want to talk about this book that I bought. It was a Madman comic, and I'd never read Madman before. If you're someone who's read a lot of comics, you've probably seen Mike Allred's series, Madman. It's like, it was a big book, I think, at Image for a while.
Just clarify for the listeners, this is Madman, not to be confused with the John Hamm helmed TV series. Right.
Yeah. Madman is a series about a character that I honestly don't know anything about. I truly have no idea what it's even about. But this issue that came out was called Madman In Your Face Special, and it was a 3D comic, and it cost $10, and it came with a pair of 3D glasses, and you could read the comic, and it was in 3D, like the red and blue 3D, and it was by far the most like interesting and very jarring reading experience that I've ever had, because for one, I realized, because I'd never bought anything that had those 3D glasses before, I don't really do well with those. My brain like doesn't comprehend it well, and so trying to read through this oversized massive issue that was all 3D of Mike Allred's beautiful art like jumping all over the place. I don't remember what the story was. I just remember sitting at my table at home at the time, going through this, reading a handful of pages, taking the glasses off, making sure that I understood what was going on, putting them back on over and over and over. And I thought it was, it was cool. And I know that like 3D comics are a thing, but I'd never bought one before. So I was like, I got to try this at least. And I'm sure that I have that one bagged and boarded somewhere with the glasses, because I was like, I can't get rid of this because it's ridiculous. Because at the time I was like obsessed with Mike Allred's art, and I was like, I'm just going to buy anything that he does. And it's bizarre. I know that there have been a bunch of these in the past, like I said, but it's a strange experience. I just want to make sure that it was out there, because 3D comics are definitely one of those old gimmicks from a long time ago that have sometimes like resurfaced in the weirdest places. And I think Madman, it works for Allred's art. Like his art is very cartoony and poppy, and it works really cool, or works really well. But for me, I just reading it was like super jarring. I don't remember even if I finished the story, because it was a lot. It was a lot to take in at once. But yeah, I guess I want to save the really cool one until the end. But Nick, Kate, is there anything else you want to bring up before we get to the ultimate comic book gimmick, as far as I'm concerned?
Yeah, sure. I mean, briefly, I think polybags have to be at least mentioned or addressed to some extent.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry, we gotta.
Polybags,
and like polybags are demonized so much, and yet on some level, I get it.
Wait, so when we say polybags, we're talking about the completely obscured covered books that are inside these plastic bags, right?
Right. Like very, very popular during the 90s. You would get certain books shipped to you, and they would come in these bags. And sometimes it was for innocuous reasons, like frequently the bag was used in order to store supplementary materials that came with the comic, just in a way that would, keep it from falling out or being lost, such as trading cards or things like that, right? But then in other situations, like it was basically used to deliberately obscure whatever book you were getting, in hopes that either, well, in one sense, say the book only had one cover, right? Like you knew what you're getting. Polybags were effective in that sense because even though you knew what the cover of Spider-Man 400 was, or whatever, there was only one of them, that you would buy two copies. One so that the book would remain sealed and quote-unquote fresh in the bag, and then the other one so that you could actually open it up and read it. Where things got more nasty were with books, and I don't know why I just referenced Spider-Man 400 for the other one, because Spider-Man 400 is actually the good example for this one. Todd McFarlane drew Spider-Man 400, wrote it, and did everything, and for his book they did a bunch of variant covers, but the book was polybagged, and so you didn't know what cover you were getting.
Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez.
So,
okay.
You better buy a bunch or find a friend willing to trade or something like that. And so that's where the polybag, one of the ways in which the polybag kind of got a bit of a nasty reputation for being like this sort of speculator's market, or as I call it, the you never know what you're going to get, or the Forrest Gump method of marketing, I suppose. Yeah. Which, I mean, is it really that sinister? I don't know. I mean, if you look at, like, Magic the Gathering packs of cards or even Hatchimals, right? Like, these are all couched on the premise that you're buying something without a total guarantee of what you're getting, right?
Yeah, yeah. The thing that I would say, the only time I think polybag is necessary is for something like Sex Criminals, when they did the like not safe for work variant covers, and they're like, okay, we can't show this to anyone, but you can buy it, and it's going to cost $4.69 because it's funny. And I was going to say that to me is the only case where polybags are acceptable. But Kate, it sounded to me like you had a serious problem with polybags. I'm curious to know what it is.
When it's only used to generate extra sales, like Nick mentioned, you have to buy one that stays in the bag and one that you can read. I just don't like that. It's just a marketing gimmick to make people spend more money when at the end of the day your comic probably isn't going to be worth that much more in 10 years anyway.
Right.
Like, I don't even understand it anyway. You keep it in the bag, right? And then where do you store the bag? Do you put this sealed bag in your bags and boards now? Whatever.
No, you put it in your Mylar block of plastic, Nick, that's 3 inches thick.
Yeah,
to preserve
your brick
comic
of carbonite. Yeah, and you freeze it in there and ship it off to Jabba's palace. No.
Yeah. It sounded to me, Kate, like you had one more thing you wanted to bring up before we go into the ultimate gimmick.
Yeah. So there was something that was announced and it was never made, and I'm very disappointed about this. And it was the Chew, Scratch, and Sniff cover from 2017. And
just the idea is so gross.
Yeah, I saw the rumors of this online, so of course I did a deep dive and dug into it, and it turns out that they never did it. But like, I want a Scratch and Sniff comic book cover. Maybe not of food, but
yeah. I want to know what Batman's aftershave smells like. So, can I get a Scratch and Sniff Batman that's just Bruce Wayne spraying cologne on or something, and I can scratch and just, ooh, Armani or something like that.
I was just gonna preface all of this by saying, I'm not pro polybags. I'm just saying, like, I understand the marketing. It's just the difference that I think in other realms like trading cards, right? Like, at least you can build something on that because they have like a game or something that exists around it, right? Whereas like comics, it's just fucking speculator bullshit. And the scariest thing is, like, people are still doing polybags, and I don't even mean like the sex criminal stuff. Like, they did one for DC did one for, I think, the release of Harley Quinn's Little Black Book, if you remember that, like 4 years ago.
Yeah. Marvel still does this. I mean, DC still does it. I mean, it's a thing that's really annoying, and it doesn't. I never see them sell out at Midtown, so I don't understand who's buying them.
Well, I think what was genius about when DC did this in 2015, and I do want to point this out because I think this is smart and I think this is a harmless gimmick, and I would maybe love to see this again. So for that poly bag, certain artists were commissioned to actually do original art or sketches, and then those were put in the poly bags.
Oh yeah, I remember the Jim Lee 1 in 5,000 variant that they were doing. It's fucking wild.
And it was crazy, because everyone was going wild on Bleeding Cool when one of these issues would be found, which was interesting. Mm-hmm. But they weren't marking up the price, and because these issues potentially had these original sketches inside, who was going to keep the thing sealed, right? Does that really outweigh finding original art? So I think they designed the whole thing in a way where this whole I'm going to hoard 74 of these in bags, it didn't make sense. It didn't make dollars and cents. So anyway, I thought that was kind of neat. And apparently I've got a really tangled, deep, dark relationship with the polybag that I need to go unravel after this, I suppose. Yes,
I think you need to talk to someone and get that all settled. But
yeah,
before we do that, because we're already running long on this episode, I do want to get to the best gimmick that I've ever heard of in comic books. So Nick, will you please present us best worst gimmick, please?
So for me, the best worst gimmick definitely has to be the fact that in 1977 Kiss cut a deal with Marvel, so this sentence is already in a real bad place. We're only a few words in, and we are not going anywhere good with this.
This is Kiss the band, right?
This is Kiss the band.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're going to do a deal with Marvel, which is obviously well known as family-friendly, whatever. So they're going to be in the Marvel Comics Super Special. And they said, well, how are we going to promote this issue? And someone, who knows who, someone thought it was a good idea for each Kiss member to put a vial of their blood into the red ink that made up the comic.
I cannot imagine this actually happened. I imagine someone took the blood from the members of Kiss and said, yeah, we'll definitely do it, and then immediately threw it away, right? This has to be fake.
Immediately threw it into one of those, hazmat, hazardous materials things that you see at the doctor's office.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Put it into one of those bins. But this really happened. This 100% happened. There's photographic proof. There was a notarized contract of it. It's well documented that this actually went down. So
I gotta imagine that someone bought that issue and definitely tried to lick the ink off of it or something gross.
You gotta wonder the way how much they mixed it up or whatever. Maybe someone out there has an issue and that one person's issue, all of the red ink is actually Kiss's blood.
If you leave it out in a humid room, it starts to actually bleed.
Oh my god!
I could see this. This to me is the most ridiculous, insane gimmick, and I call it the best because it's the worst that I've ever heard of. Because why? Of all the things, we were talking about so many different things, and I know there's stuff we didn't get a chance to cover, but why would you ever want to... Kiss doesn't even seem like that badass of a band to want to put their blood into a comic, and yet they did. I guess there's contractual proof that it happened. So I don't know. It just blows my mind. I was very excited about that. But anyways, we do have more things. Like I said, I'll throw some of this stuff in the show notes. If you're back us on Patreon at the right tier, you can get access to our raw show notes, so you can see all the stuff that Kait and Nick and I dug into. Mostly Kait and Nick, I should say. But for now, let's wrap up the show because we were running out of tape. You can follow us all on the internet. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow Kait at Kait Lamphere or Kait Elfear. And you can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, where I try to post pretty regularly on there, just so that folks know what kind of fun stuff that we're into.
We would love it if you went and subscribed to our Patreon. That is patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Without your support, this show wouldn't survive. Join now for access to new and Patreon-only episodes and articles, and early access to the top of my pile posts, and so much more. We also have a Goodreads group, as many of you know. It's a lovely community of comic friends, and we have weekly threads going on all the time. Some of those weekly threads going on right now we have one that is about episode 205 from last week, and we also have the July Book of the Month nomination thread, which just debuted. And if you have any other names that you want to look up or figure out the pronunciation to, we might have put them on our pronunciation guide, which is at ircbpodcast.com. We also sell merch there. And you can also get access to our zine from there, which I think if we get enough Patreon subscribers, maybe we'll all put vials of our own blood in the printed version. I mean,
if we get to 10,000 subscribers, we'll figure it out.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Rate, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. Share this show. If you haven't rated, why not? It really does help us out. You can email the show with comments, questions, jokes at ircb@destroythecyb.org, which is like cyborg, but with a dot in the middle.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music, and they have a new album coming out. So if you want to, you can go check that out at infinityshred.com. Xander is he's the star that you get in Mario, makes you run really fast and feel really good, but then it goes away until you find another one. He's that constant feeling of good feelings all the time. He also edits the show. I want to say thanks to Kait and Nick for joining me this week, and I want to say thank you to the listeners. You guys are fantastic human beings. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting us on Patreon and sending us really kind messages and stuff. We really appreciate it. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.
Can you imagine, like, trying to go to, like, calling up printing offices these days and being like, so I'm wondering if you'd print something for me? And they're like, oh, yeah, we do that. What are you thinking? And you, like, describe, well, the book would be, like, 5 inches by 7 inches and 400 pages. And then you're like, oh, this is kind of a, just a side note. I wanna put my blood in the book.
See,
like, what?
What I would do if we did something like that, it would be like, all right, everybody, I'm going to bring a single zine around with me, and next time I see you, you're going to prick your thumb and you're going to push it onto the piece of paper, and then someone will have a copy of our blood, which is disgusting, and I'm really uncomfortable. Someone's going to clone one of us, and it's going to be really weird. So maybe not. Maybe we don't do that. We'll get some fake blood, like those blood capsules, and make people think it's our blood. Haha, we got them. Anyways, sorry.